Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm Neeraj Kumar, and I'm Cloud Architect. And we have we had multiple session on Azure Talk. So, I cover multiple topics related to Azure in this Azure Talk. In the past, and also, in this series, we are talking about Azure IAM, which is Azure Identity and Access Management. In previous sessions, we have covered multiple topics, including the cloud only identity, same sign on, and also different scenarios of single sign on using AD Connect pass through and ADFS. So the last session was the single sign on through Active Directory Federation services. Today I'm going to talk about Azure AD Domain Services, which is an offering from Microsoft. It's a managed domain service offering, which is a recently Microsoft has released it. In the past, it was in preview. Now it is in GA general available, so anybody can make use of this. And in future sessions, we will cover more on Azure IAM, which Azure Access Panel, Azure AD Premium, and we'll keep adding topics as and when we start working on others for next sessions. So let's go ahead get right away into Azure AD Domain Services. So what is Azure AD DS or what is Azure AD Domain Services, right? That's the very first question everybody would love because now we have Azure AD, which is a SAML-based directory services which Microsoft has to offer you. Then you also have Active Directory Domain Services, which we implement on our server. We promote the server as a domain controller, and then we install Active Directory Domain Services on top of that. Now you have something called Azure AD Domain Services. Azure AD Domain Services is an offering from Microsoft, which is fully managed. In terms of fully managed, what does it mean? It means it's a PaaS offering, basically platform as a service. That means in past, if you had to set up your own domain, you will set up a server. On server, uh, you will install your Active Directory domain services on top of that. So you will DC promo it, and then you maintain that infrastructure as a service VM, and then also you patch it, you manage the complete infrastructure. Now, if you're working for an organization where you don't have staff to maintain a full-fledged Active Directory domain server, yet you want some of the legacy application which requires Kerberos or NTLM authentication, or even if you want your end users to log in with Kerberos and NTLM. In that case, probably you don't want to maintain a server. You don't want to put your own infrastructure as a service VM and then on top of that put in domain controller. So what Microsoft has to offer you is called Azure AD Domain Services, which is fully managed platform as a service offering. So it's easy to consume. You just go ahead and provision your Azure AD domain services, and then you can start consuming it. You can join your server into the domain. You don't have to really worry about the underlying infrastructure. You don't have to really worry about the patching the server. You really don't have to worry about promoting that domain controller. You really don't have to worry about anything about the infrastructure. It's everything is taken care of by Microsoft. Uh, So that's one piece, right? It's a PaaS offering from Microsoft. That's a fully managed, right? The second is what you can do is Azure AD DS is integrated with your Azure AD, which we all have used when you log on to Azure portal. Your identity is being sourced from Azure AD. So anybody who logs on today into Azure portal, their identity comes from Azure AD. Now, what does it mean? If it is integrated with Azure AD, that means if you are syncing any identities or any identity that you have in Azure AD and the password and the group, anything and everything which you have there will get synced into this Azure AD DS. So you don't need to set up anything at all. It's automatic. Basically, what will happen, and we'll see in the demo that this how this integration works is that you will go into the properties of Azure AD and say that, hey, I need a Azure AD DS for this Azure AD. And then it will automatically replicate the user object and the password and everything which is required for your Active Directory, which is Azure AD DS. Also, some of the features that it prominently supports it supports the LDAP bind. So what is LDAP bind, right? If you have worked in on-prem, anybody of you, and you will have seen, that you use your port number 389, right? So that is the usually the LDP protocol, lightweight directory protocol, and your application is configured to make use of LDAP bind and use that for authentication. In that case, your Azure AD is not going to work because Azure AD doesn't support LDAP or LDP. It only supports SAML. So if your application is not a modern application, it's not a cloud ready application, and it still needs to rely on lightweight directory protocol or LDAP bind for authentication and for authorization, or at least authentication for the users. In that case, you're out of luck. So either you set up a VM and then promote that as a domain controller, or you extend on-prem domain or forest into Azure. Some other organization, they don't want to do it. In that case, what Microsoft has to offer is Azure AD DS. So you can make use of Azure AD DS, which will let you use the same user credentials, which is part of Azure AD, and then it brings into Azure AD DS. And then your application can successfully make use of LDAP bind or LDAP protocol to authenticate the user. It also supports LDAP S. So most of the time, if you have noticed, uh, the LDAP S is the secure version of LDP protocol. So LDP works on 389 port and LDAP ACE works on 636 port, right? Um, so if you had any application which is making use of secure LDAP, which is most of the organization, which is security, where security is of paramount concern, they don't allow open LDAP or unencrypted LDAP, which is on 389 port, rather than they mandate you to use LDAP-S. So that is also supported. So if you had any application which wants to make use of that, that can also make use of this Azure AD domain services. Uh, it also supports group policy. If you have worked with on-prem, domain controller, I started working with Active Directory since maybe slightly for somewhat with Windows NT, but I started working with Windows 2000 onwards. So from Windows 2000 onward, even in Windows NT, you also have the group policies. So you can configure your group policy on Active Directory domain controller, which you have on-prem or which you have running in Azure. But Azure AD DS, which is a managed domain service offering from Microsoft, that also allows you to set up your own group policies. So you can set your own group policies. There are certain limitations, but you can do almost all the group policies which is supported. But there are slight limitations like you cannot set the default domain controller policy, which controls the behavior and the security settings on the domain controller. And there are also certain limitations which you can refer on Microsoft website. But in general, if you need to set up your group policies, it's also supported. You can also manage your DNS. That means that you get a DNS console and you can set up your DNS zones. You can configure your name resolution, and you can configure your forwarding. You can configure your, if you want to create a new record, you can do that. So all those sort of things, it is also available as a part of managed domain service offering from Microsoft. Next is it supports domain join. That means you can join any of your VM. And also, like, if people have worked in past or they know it, Azure AD also supports domain join Azure AD, not the domain services, but that's very limited. It's only limited to Windows 10 machines or Windows 10 tablet or Windows 10 mobile devices. Otherwise, and if you have a VM which is Windows 2012 R2, 2008, 2016, you cannot join to Azure AD. So in this case, you have Azure AD DS. So Azure AD DS fully supports joining any of the client VM into the domain, be it Windows 10, Windows 8, or you have Windows 2012 R2, 2012, 2008, 2008 R2, 2016, any VM you can join into the domain. Uh, it supports NTLM and Kerberos, as I said, because one of the need is this is a perfect suitable candidate for lift and shift operations. So usually, what happens is lift and shift. You have a lot of legacy application which doesn't work on SAML protocol, right? So for authentication, you have SAML, which is simple assertion markup language, which is the Internet Authentication Protocol, and nowadays all modern application makes use of it. Then you had, on-prem world, when we log in on our computer, we use Kerberos for our authentication or, NTLM in some cases. So any legacy application which was developed, way 6 years back, and you want to move those applications into cloud, either you have to modernize that application and, rewrite the code so that it can make use of SAML, and which means that, you'll have to spend money, you'll have to budget refactoring. So if you don't have the budget, in that case, what you can do is uh, you can use Azure AD DS. So what will happen uh, if, let's say, any application which cannot be modernized, what you will do is you will set up your Azure ADDS, and that then that Azure ADDS can pull the identities from your Azure AD, and you can use the same identities, but instead of SAML, you will use NTLM and Kerberos, and your application, which is a legacy application, will work perfectly fine without any problem. Okay. Uh, then you also have, as I said, you can use your own, on-prem credentials and password. Now, this is something called same sign-on. If you have set up your Active Directory AD Connect server, which basically syncs the objects from on-prem into Azure AD. If you have set up that, in that case, and then on top of that, if you set up ADDS, you will be able to leverage, or you will be able to use your same credentials and same passwords, same username, same password as you would have used on-prem. So like, user gets a seamless sign on. So if you have moved any application, let's say if you have moved legacy application into Azure, and if you have set up your Azure AD Connect to synchronize your user identities and password from on-prem into Azure AD, in that case, the user can use the same username and password to access your application, and user will never get to know that they are using a different identity. For them, though technically it's two different identity. One in a user exists in Azure AD and one on-prem, but technically it's two different identity. However, since the password is the same, username is same, user will never get to know that they have two identities with the same name and same password, and that's why it's also called same sign-on. Right? It also supports you can create your own organizational unit if you wish to organize your resources in your domain. You can create OUs as we do in on-prem world. You can have your servers, so you can have your users, so you can have your groups, so you whatnot. So it's also supported in Azure ADDS. In terms of high availability, since it's a PaaS offering from Microsoft, so you get high availability. So basically, in the background, you will have two virtual machines running as a domain controller for you, which is fully managed by Microsoft. and it's highly available. So means if one server goes down, you still have the second server. And we'll see as a part of demo, when we enable the Azure AD DS, it will spin up two instances for you, and it will give you two IPs. Those two IPs are of your domain controllers, basically. Finally, you can use the same management tool which we use generally on-prem. So anybody who is an Active Directory admin, we use Active Directory administrative centers, or Active Directory PowerShell, or DNS management tool. You can use the same tool. So it's nothing different. You don't get a separate set of tools. It's the same set of tool that you would use in case you were managing your Active Directory forest or Active Directory domain. Okay, so before I move on, I will, take some questions. Anybody has any question on what is Azure AD Domain Services, before I move on to next slide?
Hey Neeraj, this is Vijay. Yes, I have few questions for that.
Yeah, please go ahead, Vijay.
So the first question is, can we create trust between on-premise domain and Azure ADDS?
No, so I said, right, there are limitations, so I can refer you to the article where it talks about the limitations. You cannot set up a trust. Uh,
Okay. Okay. And the second question is, if we extend our on-premise domain to Azure, or we build Azure ADDS, so
okay.
what would be the difference? What is the extra benefit we are going to use if we are going to use the Azure ADDS rather extending my on-premise domain to
See,
Azure?
yeah, so if you extend your on-premise AD to Azure, what that means is that means opening up your firewall ports, or either putting a domain controller in Azure, which a lot of people feel uncomfortable with. That's one case. The second is, if you don't put a domain controller over there, if uh, decide to bring your traffic on-prem, you'll have to open the firewall ports, 389, 88, 53, all up ports which are required for RPC ports, for domain join and domain authentication, which a lot of organizations wouldn't prefer. So in that case, you can use Azure AD DS. That's one use case, right? Uh, Second use case is, let's say if you're not a big organization, you're a small organization, and you don't want to take a headache of maintaining your own AD infrastructure, but yet you have application which is legacy application, which cannot use SAML, and hence you cannot use Azure AD. And you have identity in Azure AD, you just create, you have cloud only identity, but you, on top of that, you realize that you have two to three applications which are legacy application. And for those legacy application, you have to provide authentication service. So in that case, you have two choices: either you set up your own domain and your own VM, promoted domain controller, or rather, you use Azure AD, which is fully managed. You don't have to do anything at all. You just spin it up and then join your VM, or your legacy application can, start making use of those and the identity which is created in Azure AD.
Okay, so even if I use Azure ADDS and I can join my Azure VMs to the domain which I build on Azure ADDS, but still if I want to utilize my on-premise identities, I'll have to either use Azure AD Connect for the synchronization with Azure AD,
Correct.
or or I'll have to use Azure ADFS.
No, you will have to sync. So in order, if you want to really use the identity from on-prem and the password, you must sync the identity and the password hash from on-prem. You don't need ADFS, and it's not going to work on ADFS. If you are not syncing your hash, then it will not work. You need to sync the hash.
Okay.
So usually when you set up ADFS, you don't sync your, most of the organization, don't sync the password. Why would they do it? If my authentication is going to come back on-prem via ADFS, why would I sync the password? You won't. But if you really want to make use of Azure AD DS, and you want to, basically use your on-prem credentials, right? In that case, you will have to synchronize your password hash. Otherwise, that's not gonna work for you. right? So we are talking about this, right? So you want to use on-prem credentials and passwords. That will that is possible only when you have set up your Azure AD Connect to sync your identity and password hash. I mean, it doesn't sync the password, it syncs the password hash, which is hash of hash of hash. It's hashed multiple times.
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Neeraj.
All right. So any other questions? Anybody?
Yeah, sorry, one more
Neeraj, this
question.
is
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Uday, go ahead.
Neeraj. If I use any legacy applications just running on premises, which won't support this any LDAP authentication. So if I want to do the single sign-on, for example, consider as a middleware, I configured the LDAP with the Kerberos or NTLM. All right, so I integrated with this on-premises to directory services in the Azure cloud.
So,
So if in case that application is going to single sign-on, so authentication will success or not in the middleware.
so you're talking about the single sign-on with the on-prem credentials, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you have configured like how single sign-on work, right? So if you have Windows integrated authentication, so on your IIS, you will go and set up Windows integrated authentication. That's how single SSO works in legacy application. Or if you are a SQL server, on the SQL server instead of SQL auth, you will use Windows integrated authentication. That's how the SSO works for those applications. So in this case, since you can join your VM to the domain, you can use your Windows integrated authentication either for your web server, which is running on IIS, or even for SQL also you can use that. So SSO will work even for legacy application if legacy application was configured with Windows integrated authentication.
Okay. Secondly, so there is any version needs to be supports in a Kerberos. How about Kerberos 5 or below on that it can support in this?
Eh, I don't see any constraint as such. It supports any which is supported from Kerberos version perspective. I'm not really sure, if we really have versioning. It can support from Windows 2000 to 2003 and above operating system. So anything and everything which is there. In fact, it can also support 2000. I need to check on the documentation, but it can support any operating system which is running Windows 2003 and above.
Okay.
All right.
So, Neeraj, I had another question.
Mhm.
As you mentioned, it's going to spin up two virtual machines at the same time once you'll use Azure ADDS. So, are both of those machines are going to spin up in the same zone, or it's going to be different?
Yeah, we'll see that demo, as a part of that demo. So I really want to get quickly to the demo so that we can see
Okay.
all those. And by the way, when you spin up this, it takes 20 to 25 minutes. So what I have done is I already have pre-created, but we'll go through the complete steps. So I will show you what happens during that. And we will see that when that it gets spun up, you will get two IP addresses for your domain.
Okay.
Right. So quickly moving into, there's some of the implementation scenario for Azure AD DS that you will see in. So as this, you can have, as an organization, your implementation can be, if you're an organization with a very small footprint and you don't have on-prem presence and it's only cloud only identity, in that case, you can make use of Azure AD DS. So what will happen is, so essentially, this is what happens, right? If you uh, so if you have any, users, which is in Azure AD. So in the previous sessions, right, in earlier sessions, we talked about Azure AD DS, the cloud only identity. That means that you only have identities only in cloud, which you're creating manually your users in Azure AD, either manually or automated script, or it could be the way you decide to create the users. You don't have any connection back to on-prem. So in that case, what can you do is you can set up your Azure AD domain services, which talks to Azure AD, which is your uh, SAML, you know, SAML, which supports the SAML protocol. So what it does is when you spin up your Azure AD domain services, there is inherent replication of your user ID and password and groups into your Azure ADDS, which is your managed domain services. And that one, gets populated as a part of Azure ADDS. Now, if you have any, resources which is, sitting into your VNet, and that resource can directly talk to your Azure ADDS domain name, or the domain controller that we put in, Microsoft puts in for you in the background. So these services will talk to that, and continue utilizing the LDAP or NTLM or Kerberos protocol. So this is one scenario wherein you have only a small organization, you have only identity in Azure, and then on top of that, either you bought a new legacy application, or you had a legacy application which doesn't work on SAML, and you don't have budget, you don't have a money to modernize that application. So in that case, uh, yeah, this is your scenario one, right? So your identity gets synced to Azure ADDS, your username and password, and then your application or your VMs can make use of NTLM. The second scenario is where we are talking about, and uh, which you pose this question. Uh, in in the second scenario is hybrid organization, which means that you also have on-prem presence, right? So you have on-prem Active Directory domain services. Earlier they were calling it Active Directory domain controllers. Now it's renamed as ADDS from Windows 2008 R2, I think. And you also have uh, you know something called uh, in terms of identity synchronization, right? So you have AD Connect, Azure AD Connect, which syncs your identity from here, from on-prem to Azure AD. Now all your identities are synced from on-prem. Now keep in mind that Azure AD Connect should be configured to sync user and password hash both if you really want to leverage your Azure AD domain services. If you're not syncing your password hash, this is not going to work. In fact, it will error out. So that's one of the, uh, you can say, the prerequisite. So if you have on-prem identities and you're already synchronizing in Azure AD because you're using other SaaS product, and you're using that identity for accessing those SaaS product. In that case, you can go ahead and set up your Azure ADDS. The only caveat is you'll also have to sync the password. Once you've enabled the password sync along with the user identity, you can set up your Azure AD domain services, which will again talk to the Azure Active Directory and pull the users and password into its own database, and then your application can make use of those identities in form by way of NTLM or by Kerberos, or the domain join or the LDAP bind. It can make use of that. The difference between these two scenario is that on the left side, your identity exists in cloud. Your identities are created in cloud. Whereas on the right side, which is the hybrid scenario, your identity exists in on-prem, right? And your identity will get created on-prem. That's a difference. That's a key difference. And this, in case of hybrid, your on-prem identity gets synced to Azure AD, and then from there on, it's the same repetitive process, whether you are hybrid or whether you are cloud only. The only difference is from where we are sourcing the identity into Azure AD. Are we creating straight away into Azure AD and we don't have any talk with on-prem? Then it's cloud only. If we are, sourcing our identity, we are syncing using Azure AD, connecting to Azure Active Directory, then it's a hybrid setup, right? So this is two of the implementation scenario that you can will come across for Azure AD DS, right? Okay. Any questions? So next is we'll move into the demo. So let's go ahead get into the demo section. One caveat, guys, this Azure AD DS is not available in modern portal. So that means it's only available in legacy up portal, which is a classic portal. So if you had any, resources in modern portal, it's not going to recognize that and it will not work. So currently, as of today, as I'm speaking, it is still only available in classic portal. So you'll have to create your resources from there. So
But
mhm.
is it still in preview mode?
No, it's not in preview. It has come out in GA, but Microsoft has not made it available in new portal. So I'm assuming it will be soon made available via new portal, which is Azure Resource Manager portal.
Okay.
Okay. No, I don't know about reason. In fact, when I was fiddling around with this, I was surprised to discover that it's only available in Azure Classic portal, but not in Resource Manager portal. So I was surprised myself. I was surprised too. So I need to dig further,
Okay.
why they have done it. Maybe it's because legacy application, means older. So probably it's for they introduced it for the old, the old customers who are still on the old portal. They have been using it for long. That's could be the reason, but I certainly don't know the reason. Okay.
So does that mean if we create any virtual machine in ARM portal, it's not going to, we are not going to join that VM in this domain?
Correct, correct. So, for example, right? So I have this is my ARM portal, right? If you look at here, what I have done is uh, I have created a VM which is in Classic portal. So, uh, in the ARM portal, you can see the Classic VM, but if I go in the Classic portal, I won't be able to see my, the ARM portal VM.
VM.
So you see, I see only one VM, whereas I have five VMs running in ARM portal. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So let's come back to, how do we enable the Azure AD DS, right? So the first thing first is you will come into the properties of your Azure Active Directory or Azure AD, not Active Directory, sorry, Azure AD. And from there, you will go into the property of the Azure AD on which you want to associate your Active Directory domain services. Um, so and you can have only one ADDS per Azure Active Directory. So you can't have multiple. So make sure that you have chosen your name wisely and you can have only one. So for example, let's say if I want to enable Azure ADDS for one of my directory, which is AZ Farm, so you will obviously go into the classic portal, come to the uh, your Azure AD, and then you will come to your Active Directory or the Azure AD name and come to the properties. Then you will click on the configure section over here. So if I click on configure, so what this will it will give me an option to enable Azure AD DS. Now while it's refreshing, if you scroll down and here you see, right? So if you look at it, it says domain services. You can say enable domain services for this directory, and yes and no. So if you say yes, it's going to go ahead and get it will ask you for the domain name. We'll see that. It will also ask for VNet where you want to place it. It will also ask for the subnet. Now, one thing which is very key to watch here is it says by enabling Azure AD domain services for this directory, Microsoft is very explicit. It's saying you consent to storing credential hashes. As I said, they don't store the actual password. They store the hash, and hash is encrypted. Uh, it's a text of the password. It's not the actual password for NTLM verbose authentication in Azure AD. So that's one of the key factors which Microsoft highlights. If you're not comfortable with this, then probably you cannot make use of Azure AD DS. All right. So what happens if I say yes, right? So you say yes, then it will ask you for your domain name. Now, what domain name you want to use, Microsoft pre-populates it for you. You can use your on Microsoft.com. That will be your local domain, or you can use your the domain name which is associated if you have any custom domain name, or you can also write your own domain name. So I can say azfarm.local. Microsoft lets you choose your own domain name the way you will do in your on-prem one. Now remember, uh, the connect to here you specify your VNet and the subnet, which subnet this is going to be. So you can specify the sub. I have two subnets. I can select VNet, but remember here the VNet again has to be created in your uh, classic portal. So any VNet which is created here, you don't see those. So if I come here, I have three VNets which is created in ARM portal. None of those, you know, will show up in my classic portal. So keep that in mind that you will have to set up your VNet infrastructure and the subnet infrastructure of the networking in Azure Classic portal. So you see, I don't see any of my other VNets there, right? So what I have done is, and obviously prior to this demo, I've already pre-created my VNet and subnet. So once you do that, you specify your domain name, you specify your VNet and the IP, say subnet, and then you say save. What it will do is it will start provisioning the domain controller in the background, and it will populate the two IPs. It will show you those two IPs. What I'll do is I'm not going to do this because I already have it takes 30 minutes to provision it, and I really don't want you people to wait for that much time. So what I have done is I have already started that process some 20 minutes before the start of this session. So I will say discard it, and I'll come back to my directory where I have enabled it. So this is my directory where I have enabled Active Directory Domain Services, which is Azure AD DS. And if I scroll down, so you can see, right? So what I did is I created cloudeasy.local. That was my domain name, and it was assigned to my my VNet and management subnet that I have. And you see one IP. Right now you only see one IP. The reason is still being provisioned in the background. So soon you will see two IPs, once it is configured. But currently now I have just I can only see one IP. But this is the IP address of the domain controller. Now, this IP is what you will use and configure as your DNS server on your VNet so that your VMs can resolve your cloudeasy.local or name within the cloudeasy.local uh, forest. And then obviously subsequently, it can go also out to internet. So what I'm gonna do is uh, so I have this IP. Now what the next step is, obviously, when this is a fully provisioned, I will have another IP address, but it doesn't matter. Since I have one IP, so I'm good to go. I can join any VM. I can, log on, or I can do a name resolution. So in next step, what I'm gonna do is first I will set up my VNet with this IP address as a DNS server so that any resource in that VNet can make use of this IP address to resolve name DNS name, and then I will have my VM which I have pre-provisioned. Again, that VM is provisioned in Classic Portal. I will join that VM into the this Azure AD DS domain, which is the managed domain services. So before I move on, any question on the demo piece?
So can we configure only one domain?
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Can we do multiple domain configuration on this?
no, with one Azure AD, so you can only have one
Okay.
corresponding ADDS. You can't have multiple. It's 1:1. So, some of the question that let's talk about the capabilities. So, like, I know um, Vijay asked this question, right? What are the capabilities? So, I'm showing you a capability matrix which compares the Azure AD domain services, which is a managed domain service, and a traditional, Azure, a traditional AD Active Directory, which we set up on-prem, right? So some of the differences that you will see that you don't have enterprise administrator or domain administrator credential in case of Azure AD domain services. You don't get that, but you get an account with which you can manage your group policies and other stuff. So that's one key, point to watch for. The second is obviously domain join. You can do in the both. You can do the Kerberos authentication and Telem authentication in both, as we know. Custom OU you can create in both. Here, in case of Azure AD DS, you cannot do an extension, schema extension, right? So if you have Active Directory schema, you want to do that, you cannot do that. The next thing is you cannot set up Active Directory forest trust. You cannot do that uh, in case of Azure AD DS. Rest other, LDAP reads, it's fine. LDAP write, you cannot, you can read, so your application can make, can query users or authenticate the user. But if it's trying to make any changes, that's not possible. So LDAP write is not possible. Group policies, as I said, it doesn't support all group policies. It's some of the basic functionality which it supports, and then you can do that. The another thing is geo-distributed, which means you're talking about 80 sites and services. So you can have multiple Active Directory sites, which is not supported in case of Azure ADDS. Right?
So one side Microsoft recommends to use ARM portal, but in this case we are going to build this ADDS in my classic portal. So if we are not going to join the virtual machine in ARM portal created, so not sure what kind of benefits we are going to achieve with this.
That's a very good question, and that's a very good observation. Even I, as I said, I don't know why it's only available in Classic portal but not in ARM portal. We'll have to wait and watch. Let's see. All right, so let's come back to, let me copy this IP address. This is going to be my DNS server for my VNet. So I come over into my VNet, and this is my VNet, and I click on configure, and under the configure I should have an option for DNS server. So I specify the DNS server, and I say save. Okay, so I will specify DNS1, and I say save. So now what I have done is I have specified the DNS server for my VNet. So any VM inside that VNet which is joined will make use of this DNS server, right? So let's go back and check if my VM is up and running. I have pre-created a VM, and it should be up and running. This is a Windows 2012 R2 VM, which is I have seen it over here. So what I'll do is I will go ahead and say restart, because after you make the change into your VNet to certain IP of your DNS server, any VM in that VNet has to be rebooted so that it can pick up that new DNS server. So I will say restart it, and then once it is restarted, I will connect to that VM. So Connect, and it will download an RDP file for me, and I will open it, but let it reboot it. Once it is rebooted, then we will RDP into it. Again, all this VM was also created in Classic Portal, the VM which we will join to the domain, that was also created in Classic Portal. So obviously it's not yet ready. So let me get into the.
Neeraj, I just want to know about the security prospects of this. So I'm going to add my provide my authentication for forest domains. So if in case it's token and authorizing is happening in between on premises to the Azure, that's fantastic. But how would they secured on this? Apart from the NSG, apart from the access list, do we have any specific security apart from the CredBros and NTL and whatever it is, SAML and so on?
So these machines are, it's not exposed to internet. If you want to, you can expose it, but it's only accessible from your VNet. So, as long as it is within the VNet, you're safe and secure, right? But if you expose it over internet, then you, as you said, you have NSG, Network Security Group, to control access, as in who and comes validating it. Second option, you can also configure host level firewall, which Microsoft has a firewall which you can configure on the operating system level. But in this case, you cannot do it. The reason is because it's fully managed. Uh, so in terms of security, you have NSG that which controls the access, or the best security is don't expose it to internet. Just keep it local to your VM.
So Microsoft recommend any other security platforms such as apart from this, can use Sophos or any other third-party tool to make more security in your environment apart from
So,
NSG or
so
Access List.
yeah, I mean you have checkpoints. So you're going in slightly different conversation now. We're talking about NVA, Network Virtual Appliance. So there are many NVAs you can use. Palo Alto is there, Checkpoint is there, wherein you can inspect every traffic which is coming in or going out. You can do that. So you can have any appliances you can put, and what will happen is once you configure network virtual appliance, any traffic which exists out of subnet will first get forwarded to that NVA. That NVA inspects it, and then only if it finds you know harmless, then it lets you uh, you know it lets to internet or to other subnet. So you can use a Checkpoint, you can use Barracuda, you can use Palo Alto, as I said. There are many vendors that, but Microsoft will not recommend any of those, right? At least because all are vendors. You can use anything. Okay, so looks like the VM is up. Let me log in. So it should log me in, and hopefully the DNS is configured properly, so it should be able to see cloudeasy.local, which is my domain which I have configured. Alrighty, let's come over here, head over to this. One of the users in Azure AD. Maybe I can use my credentials. Let's see if one of the users' password I remember. In this one, should use it two. I can make use of this. So let's use this guy.
But that administrator password would require from cloud local, right?
So whatever password you have set up, right? So that's what you will see it.
Now to join the domain, I need the password for any user account which is in Azure AD DS.
Which is in ADDS,
Here,
which is in ADDS, correct.
correct.
So the user that we have in ADDS is sourced from our Azure AD, and that's why I'm trying to look up a user ID from there. So I know this guy, and I know password of this guy too. So I will try that. And password will be. So this should go. Oops. The username and password is incorrect.
No,
Let's create a group, and it is called Azure ADDZ Administrators Security Group. And for ADDS, and I will add user in it, and this will be, let's see, I can use this one. So now this guy gets added. Hopefully this will get replicated, and then it will let me use well, I should use it 2 at cloudeasy.com. So let's see. Hopefully this time it works. No?
are you sure the password is correct? Or we can reset the password for this account?
That's cool, guys.
So basically what has happened is, obviously, I missed one step, right? So let's recap what we did. So obviously, in addition to what we have done, we also had to create one group, and that group is Azure AAD DC administrators, right? This is what we have done, and I'm really sorry that I missed this step. So any, member of this group, it will have power to manage that manage Azure AD or joining the VM to the domain, right? So we missed this step. So what we did now, like, we created this group, right? Uh, which is exactly in this format. You will create ADDC administrators, and then you add your user who will belong to that. And this is the group which has administrative privilege on ADDS domain, managed Azure ADDS domain. So I added a couple of users. It didn't work earlier, maybe because I had wrong password, or some other problem. So maybe let's go ahead and remove these two. I will only keep you, Vijay. Uh,
Only my ID.
yeah, so what we did is we had this VM, right? So we joined this VM cloudeasy.local, and we put in the credential of which that your identity that I have added as a member of our AADDC administrators group. And then after that, obviously there were some hiccups. It takes some time to sync the password. We rebooted the machine, and then we could join the VM to the domain. So let's go ahead and say okay, and let's reset it. Reset now. So now if we want to manage Active Directory domain, probably we can do that with that server if we install the remote server administration tool, RSAT tool on that server.
So if I create any of the VM with the file server role on the cloud.easy.local, will I be able to give permission to my on-premise identities?
Uh, that's a good question. That probably, you can do hands-on. We'll need to look into that. But you should be able to because those users will pop up into Azure AD, so you can assign the permissions for sure. Let's see. We'll see here.
Now it's going to use Kerberos. So
Yeah.
we
So
should be able
hopefully we should be able to do it. I don't see a challenge there.
to. Okay.
And I'm sorry, guys, it took us 15 minutes to figure out what was the problem.
Oh, that was a good learning.
Oh, yeah. So let's get right to the VM. Let's see if it is started. So now this time I will log in with your credential, which I'm still booting up. Yep, it's still booting up. Let it boot. So let's go ahead and log in with Vijay's credential. Vijay Nagpal at cloudeasy.com. Password. And I say okay. So now you see this ID that I'm using, this ID is from my Azure AD, right? And I will be able to log in because now, uh, and you see what it says, Cloud Easy domain, and it's logging on, right? So I've used this account, which is purely exists in Azure AD that got replicated to our Azure AD DS, and now this user is also a member of AAD DC administrator group, which means it has full-fledged permission to manage that domain. And now I'm logging on to this machine, which is joined to our uh, Azure ADDS domain, which is cloudeasy.local with the same credentials. And here you go, I'm logged on. So now what we can do is, uh, let's see if we have administrative tools here. If and I have my Active Directory domain management services tool. If not, then we'll have to install it.
Only rather pass through authentication.
No, yeah, you need password sync. You don't need anything else. So your identity should be configured, identity synchronization along with the password sync. No pass-through, no ADFS, nothing is required.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and add. I don't see my tool, so I will say manage, add roles and features. And I will add a feature. Next. So I only need the tools, right? I don't need the server, so I'll come into the features. And do I see remote server administration tool or Active Directory administration tool?
No, that was up.
Oh, that was up.
Yeah, here you go.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yep. Okay. Add features. Say next. And next. No, I don't need anything. I'm fine with management tools. And I say install. So this should install my tool. And then when I fire up Active Directory Administrative Center, it will show me that snapping. And I should be able to see all the users. So I'll let it run. I will take couple of minutes. Okay, it's done. Close. No, it's not done. It's still running. Feature installation is going on. So while it's running, anybody has any question in general that you about this or any previous session that we have covered or any topic, any short questions that you want to ask? No questions?
I had a question for the last previous session, but maybe I can discuss that offline with Azure ADFS.
Okay. Yeah, so for Azure ADFS, sorry, honestly speaking, I should have posted a video wherein, uh, we should have configured the ADFS and ADFS proxy along with the internal load balance, external load balance. Maybe I will connect with you and then, we will do it and post a full-fledged video because that's what the production ready environment should be, right?
Okay.
Pilot phase, so definitely Microsoft will come back to how can you integrate with all the PaaS and SaaS model
Okay,
from Azure Stack TP3.
that's good. So good. Let's get back to the demo. So now I have opened the let's just get rid of this guy first. Active Directory users and computers, and you can see that I have cloud easy.local, which is not running on this server. Rather, I'm using a remote server administration tool to connect to the domain controller, which Microsoft is running for me in the background. And if you look at this, what is the domain controller name, right? This is something what Microsoft has created for me. And there are two servers, which you can see over here. Some garbage name .cloudeasy.local, then the NLQ one, and both of those servers belong to my default first site name of Active Directory. And it's also a global catalog, which means it can respond to 3268 as well. So here you go. Here you should be able to see the users. So I have, these are the users that I have, which are sourced from different places, all, but all coming from, Azure AD. It's getting synced over here. Then if you look at the domain admin, so and remember, as I said, you will not be able to set the policies at the domain controller. You can be able to manage, some simple users, but simple group policies, but not entire. Like if you want to set up a domain controller policy here, you won't be able to set the group policies at the domain controller level or the default domain controller policy. You can't do it. So that's it.
What's the difference between ADDC users and users?
Uh, this is the users, right? This is all users that we have sourced from Azure AD. All these users have come from this users.
We have one container is users. So can we create separate users in this domain?
Uh, not sure. Let's see.
Just
Let's say try if you
let it
can.
no.
No, you can't create one. So that's for the machine. That's for Microsoft to use if you want to create one. And you can't basically you can't create here, right? So anything that you create, it has to come from Azure AD. So if you create a user in Azure AD, that will get populated over here. Hopefully, this is something which you look for, Azure AD DS, which is managed domain services. And next session, we will cover access panel, which is, wherein you can assign your users certain applications and assign permission on this application. So user have one central repository to access all his application, and you can configure single sign-on with Azure AD, and that will be the session that will be jointly hosted. I and Praise both will work on that, and Praise is going to do the complete demo wherein he will have application, the code, registration, everything from end to end, and probably I will help him with the presentation part, or maybe no. So both of us will do it together next week. All right, guys. Uh,
Fantastic.
Thank you very much for joining our session today, and hope you find it useful, and we'll have more sessions in future.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Sure, thanks all.